Can you hear me now? Is it okay? You can hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, let me start again. So for those who don't know me, my name is Michael Hofmeyr, and I'm currently teaching, or I've been teaching for a few years at Osaka University, but I'm also working on my PhD in computer-assisted language learning at Kyoto University at the Peterson Lab. And the results I'll be talking about today are some of the preliminary results of a pilot project that I've been doing that's part of my PhD program. And this is on learner attitudes towards digital game-based tasks for language education. Oops, okay. So why did I choose this topic? Well, I think there is much evidence to suggest that playing certain types of digital games in a second language can effectively facilitate second language acquisition. And also many studies have highlighted the positive effects that games can have on learners' motivation, because well-designed games are made to be highly enjoyable and highly engaging, which is also good for language learning. But despite these promising research findings, digital game-based language learning is still kind of a fringe approach, I think, in language education, both in Japan and elsewhere in the world. And I think part of the reason for the lack of adoption of this approach is because there are many technical difficulties in getting the games to run. Sometimes you need an internet connection in class and things like that, which can be really tricky. But I think another part of the reason is that some negative attitudes exist towards using games for education, because games are made to be fun, and people view education as something more serious. So there's a lack of buy-in, both on the part of teachers and on learners in many cases, I believe. So my research question is then, my basic research question is, what do learners think about digital game-based language learning? So I want to focus on the learners' attitudes and beliefs. So my first sub-question is, what are learners' beliefs and attitudes towards digital game-based language learning, specifically in the classroom? And here I thought, before I started the study, that learners would prefer conventional teaching approaches and be quite skeptical of digital game-based language learning, especially because I work at a national university in Japan where the students have a reputation to be quite serious and studious, and maybe a little bit conservative in their ideas about teaching methodologies or methods. And then my second sub-question was, does first-hand experience with this approach result in greater acceptance? And here my hypothesis was that I thought that once learners have participated in an appropriate game-based activity, they will recognize the potential of this approach and they will start to view it more positively. So this is the game that I used with my class. It's called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. I know there are some other teachers in Japan who have used this game in their language classes with some positive results. If you don't know this game, basically the premise is that there's a bomb that needs to be defused, and it's a multiplayer game, so a team of players work together to defuse this bomb. But what makes this game interesting is that only one person can see the bomb at a time, so that person is the diffuser, and then there's a manual with instructions for how to defuse the bomb, or basically how to solve the different puzzles on the bomb. And the other student or students then have access to this manual, but they can't see the bomb on the computer screen. So this creates an information gap, and the two sides need to communicate effectively with one another in order to solve the puzzle then and to succeed at the game. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like in the classroom or in practice, here we have a group of 3 students playing this game, one in front of the computer describing the bomb, and the others looking at the manual to try and find the right instructions to then tell the student what to do to defuse the bomb. And of course, yeah, the students gave their permission for this photo to be used in my research presentations. So I asked 4 groups of 3 learners each to play this game over 4 one-hour sessions. So in total, I had 12 students who participated in this study. All of the students were second-year undergraduate students majoring in English studies at a major national university in Japan. You can probably guess which one. Then I used a mixed methods research design, so it included both quantitative and qualitative data in order to give it a more holistic perspective, to give us a more holistic perspective on their attitudes. So The quantitative research or data collection consisted out of 2 pilot surveys that I used to measure their beliefs and attitudes towards digital game-based language learning. So the surveys were essentially the same for the most part, and I asked them the same questions before we started the intervention, the game play, and others, I gave them the same questions again after, so that I could compare what they thought before playing the game and what they thought after playing the game. And then I also conducted focus group interviews with the participants after the final session, where I asked them to share and explain their views on digital game-based language learning and specifically about this game that they played. So just to give you a rough profile of the participants, I had 10 Japanese students who spoke Japanese as a first language, and there were 2 international students who spoke Chinese as a first language. The males and females were more or less balanced. They were all between 20 and 22 years old. The English proficiency level of this group was quite high. So CEFR B2 to C1. They reported having quite reasonably high IT skills in general, and also almost all of them have quite a substantial gaming experience. They've played many digital games before, also of quite a large variety of different genres. I asked them if they had played Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, and nobody had before this, before our first session. And some of them, 3 of them, said they have played games for language learning purposes before, but that these games were not made for entertainment. They were made specifically for language learning. So they were kind of gamified apps to help with language learning. So my findings, so first I'll talk about these findings from my surveys. So my first set of questions that I asked on the survey was general, to determine their general attitudes towards digital game-based language learning and learning with technology. So I just asked them directly, how strongly do you agree with these statements on a Likert scale from 1 to 6? So for example, certain types of digital games can help learners to improve their foreign language skills. And overall, I found that learners expressed positive to very positive attitudes towards the potential of digital games and also technology in general to facilitate language learning. And remember, this was only before I had them play the game. So these were their sort of baseline attitudes. They said that they were eager to use digital games for language learning outside of class, but they were a little less positive about doing it as an in-class activity. So they only slightly agreed on average that they'd like to do it as an in-class activity. So overall, learners reported positive attitudes towards digital game-based language learning from the outset. And then this actually refutes my first hypothesis, because I thought that they would be much more skeptical of this approach, but it supports a conclusion reached by Bolliger et al. In a 2015 paper, where they surveyed quite a large number of students at a private university in Japan about their attitudes towards game-based language learning, and they also found very positive attitudes in general from the outset. And then I asked them the same questions again in the post survey, so after the intervention. And then I found that learners' responses to the same questions were even more positive than before. And the variance between the answers, between the learners for the same answer, were also smaller in general. And I thought what's very interesting was there was a mean score for 4 on the Likert scale. For the statement, I would like to play digital games as a regular class activity, so in a formal learning environment. So that's only slightly agree before the gameplay experience, but after the gameplay experience, the majority of the learners, 7 out of 12, now strongly agreed. So they gave the maximum score on the scale that they would like to do this activity, which I found very interesting. So these results support my second hypothesis, namely that first-hand experience with digital game-based language learning leads to greater acceptance of this approach. So the second part of my survey focused on skill development. So basically, I just asked them how helpful do they think that digital game activities can be for developing the following list of 9 language learning skill or L2 related skills, right? So for example, listening skills, speaking skill, fluency, pronunciation, and so on. And you could see here my results of the pre-survey and the post-intervention survey. And so with the exception of writing skill development and vocabulary building, the learners' responses after the intervention indicated much greater trust in the potential of game-based activities to improve L2 skills. And in 4 cases, with speaking skill development, practical interaction and communication, fluency in speaking and pronunciation, this score was much higher after the intervention than before. So these results lend further support to the second hypothesis. And then finally, in the final part of the survey, I asked learners about task characteristics. So I asked them to rate first on a 6-point Likert scale again, the importance of 13 different task characteristics, which I thought were relevant to game-based language learning. And then they rated as the most important these 5 characteristics: working towards clear goals when you do a learning activity, high engagement in the activity, high enjoyment of the activity, excitement in doing the activity, and the opportunity to produce linguistic output. And then I survey the next, well, as part of the follow-up to this, I asked them to rate on a 6-point Likert scale to what extent digital games had the potential to realize these task characteristics. So how could these task characteristics be exploited in digital games, or at least occur in playing digital games? So on the post-intervention survey, mean scores increased for all 5 of the task characteristics that learners identified earlier as highly important. So I think these results also lend additional support to the second hypothesis, as learners showed greater confidence in digital game-based language learning to benefit SLA, specifically in the ways that they considered to be the most important for SLA development. And then, so now I'll talk a little bit about the focus group interview results. So I thought it was very interesting that when I started interviewing the one group, they said that the game was surprisingly interesting and fun, whereas they had expected sort of explicitly education-focused game. They were pleasantly surprised to find that it was a game made for entertainment and not a game made for language learning. And they actually enjoyed this a lot. So the first question I asked all of the groups were, how might this game help you to develop your English language proficiency after having played it? And some common answers that I received were, it encourages efficient communication of meaning rather than accuracy, because you have to share information quickly in order to succeed in the game. One learner said, I'm confident that I can speak correctly, I'm not confident that I can speak correctly, but I can make sense. And then the other learners agreed that this was actually a very good thing, to not focus so much on accuracy, but on communication. And then other learners said that it's good speaking and listening practice. Some said that it allows you to be creative with language and to experiment with language, for example, naming obscure symbols and things like that. And then some also mentioned that there's an opportunity to learn and practice new vocabulary, although some said that maybe the vocabulary in this game is not particularly useful for real life situations because it's all about bomb defusal. And then another learner mentioned that it was nice to have to be exposed to different forms of English, because we had some international students in the group. And they also said that this game would be a lot of fun if there were some native speakers of English joining the activity. So then I asked them, would you like to play this game as part of an English language course? And surprisingly to me, again, all of the groups said yes, they would like to play it as a formal, in part of a formal language course. And some were very enthusiastic. Some told me I'd be a popular teacher if I started using these games in my lessons, while others expressed some reservations as well. Overall, several learners said it would be more exciting than the normal small group discussion activities we do in our speaking classes. Some worried a bit that the bomb defusal scenario, again, is not so realistic, so helpful for day-to-day conversations, so they'd like more realistic scenarios. Others expressed concern that some of the learners started using sort of minimal grammar or telegraphic style in communication to help them solve the puzzles as quickly as possible, and they felt this kind of speaking is maybe not so useful in real life context. So I think there was a consensus among all the groups that this game would work really well as a warm-up activity, but that it should be only a supplemental activity and it shouldn't replace the other conventional speaking class activities completely. Then I also asked him, would you like to play this game to improve your English in an informal setting? So for example, at a self-access center on campus or at a friend's home. And now this time all of the learners also said yes. One pointed out that maybe they already have an English corner at the university where they can go and practice their English, but she said that this is very difficult to do for shy learners to initiate a conversation, but if there's a game and you can play according to the rules, these shy learners can participate and practice their English much more actively. Some learners expressed concern, though, that if there's not a teacher watching them, then the players might get so into the game that they'd forget to speak English and they just switch to Japanese. And then, of course, there's very little language learning benefit probably for developing their English skills. And others said that students are busy on campus, maybe even if the game's available and they would like the game, they wouldn't take the initiative to start playing it. So if it's at a self-access center, the center management would have to organize events and promote it for learners to join. So these reflections based on the learners' own experiences with game help to explain the increased acceptance of digital game-based language learning that we saw in the surveys, both inside and outside of the language classroom. So of course, this study had some limitations, the most obvious being that for a quantitative study, the number of respondents was really small, only 12. So I can't really generalize this data to students at large or even students at the university where I collected this. So I'd have to do a follow-up study with a much larger group if I want more generalizable results. And also, even though the sexes were quite balanced. Otherwise, the learners were quite homogeneous. So the first language was mostly Japanese. The English proficiency was upper intermediate, and they were all studying at the same university. I also used the convenient sampling methods because I recruited participants from my own students and they self-reported their experiences and attitudes. So there's a risk of bias in the results. And finally, the results were very obviously influenced by the specific game that they played, and it would probably be quite different if another game was used instead. So the game that I used, it's a case study, and it can't necessarily be generalized to all other games. So I'd like to do a follow-up study where I maybe post-COVID, where I have my students back on campus, and I'd like to try this out with the classes and survey my actual English-speaking classes, and then I'd have a much larger group to report on. And I think I'd also like to focus more explicitly on entertainment-focused games in my questions. And then other researchers are also welcome to replicate my study with different groups of learners. So for example, younger learners or learners with lower English proficiency. Or they can try and replicate it with a different game. And I think by bringing in all these different perspectives, we can get a much better idea of how learners feel and are likely to react to this type of approach, teaching approach in a Japanese context and beyond. So the final takeaway for teachers, these initial results suggest that learners may be more open to the use of digital games in the language classroom than teachers might expect, and that a positive experience with game-based learning will make them even more open and even more positive towards this approach. So if you have an idea for using a game-based language activity and you're in a position to experiment with new teaching approaches, I recommend that you go for it. And here are some of the papers that I mentioned, works that I mentioned in my presentation. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions or comments, then I'd like to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, first I'd like to ask all of the participants to unmute yourselves so that we can give an audible applause for Michael. All right, everyone. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and I would like to suggest that if you can, use the participants list as a raise hand button if you have a question.
Hello, Joel.
Hi. You mentioned briefly that some of the students had expected it to be more of a
So they expected it to be more of an explicitly educational game. So for example, something that records your voice and then gives you feedback from a sort of like a digital language teacher, or
right.
vocabulary matching game or something along those lines.
I was wondering if they expected it to be more like Duolingo or one of the gamified apps that you suggested.
Yeah, they didn't specify it in the interviews. They just said they thought it would be more sort of like, it would feel more like a learning game, and this felt like an entertainment game, not like a learning game.
So I was wondering then, do you have any plans or do you have any ideas to compare what the results might be with a gamified learning app compared to the research you've been doing?
So for my project, I'm only using this one game because I thought it's quite interesting to use a game that's designed for entertainment and not for language learning, because I think a lot of people already learn English and other foreign languages in this way informally, especially by playing, for example, online RPGs and things like that, right, in a foreign language. So I would just like to understand this phenomenon better of how people learn English and other languages informally through games. And then I'm hoping that some of my findings would be useful as well for teachers and for an in-class context, and maybe to apply some of these findings to gamified or gamification approaches for language learning.
Well, I do think your results are very interesting. I'm very interested in this subject. I've never done it with digital games. I've always used board games or card games. And so this approach to using a digital game in the classroom is new to me, and I'm eager to read more when you have more results or more projects to present. So thank you.
Okay, no problem. Can I take another question, or should we finish now?
You can do one more, and Douglas is raising his hand.
Could I suggest either using escape room games or cooperative games for your next project? I think the game you used is a really good idea. Just to so yeah, escape rooms or cooperative. Like Joe, I use a lot of board games, and cooperative board games are really useful for generating conversation. But I'm sure
the escape room games that you're talking about, are those digital games or are those board games?
I'm pretty sure they are also. They've been digitalized, I think. Yeah, so that's what I would. Yeah. That's what I suggest.
Thank you for the suggestion. I know there's an escape room game in virtual reality that looks like a lot of fun, but again, implementing that in an actual class might be kind of tricky because you need the headset. You can't do that one on a mobile phone, I think.
Right, yeah.
Joshua has a quick question in the chat if you want to look at that, Michael.
Sorry, short answer in the chat. No.
He says, very good idea. Does it draw from task-based cycle? It seems like it does.
Yes, I was kind of, well, I read some of the task-based literature, and I thought that part of the my original inspiration for this was that I thought a lot of the communication and the meaning-focused communication that goes on, and especially with this information gap mechanic, is very similar to the kind of task-based activities that we traditionally do in communicative classrooms. So I thought the activities would probably have many of the same benefits, and it facilitates negotiation for meaning and discourse strategies and things that are part of the rationale why we use these task-based activities. So I thought I could link it with that literature. So actually, for a different paper that I'm working on, I look into that, how the gaming task and interaction can result in these types of interaction and negotiation that could facilitate language learning.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Everyone, if you could just unmute yourselves one more time, and let's give some applause for our speaker.
Thank you very much.
Most enjoyable.
Of course, you can use the virtual. Okay, thank you very much. Please enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right. If anyone wants to chat, we can go to the.
There's a hangout room. Yes.
Hangout room. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.